Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guests are the penciler and inker team from the Image series, Crowded. It's Stein and Ted Brandt. Thanks for coming on, Ro and Ted.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's absolutely wonderful to be here.
So, you guys are your new guests to the show. You're also kind of, I don't want to say you're newer to comics because that feels insulting, but, Crowded is your biggest project ever. So I want to start by kind of introducing who you are and where you came from as comic creators to my listeners. So let's start with your path to comics, specifically when you first became interested in comics themselves. Where did that start? Ted, I want to start with you because I have to admit, there was one time on Twitter, there was a really hard Marvel quiz that Hassan Otsman El How shared. And you got an absurd score on it. And it was very upsetting to me because I couldn't believe that a person could get that high of a score. And I really know Marvel Comics. So what was your start for comics?
As young as I could read. I read Tintin and Asterix, literally from the youngest point. So maybe about 3, I'm guessing that was when I started reading comics. And then... at about maybe 5 or 6 was when I saw the Marvel comics, the Marvel animated shows on Saturday morning TV, and then so that kind of got me hooked on X-Men, which I didn't actually start reading till regularly till I was 15. But I kind of, because we get like digest issues in the UK, sure, where you get kind of Wolverine and Gambit as one of the titles. You get one issue of Wolverine, and then part of an X-Men storyline that's heavily Gambit focused.
I love that. Wolverine and Gambit, man, you have to be a 90s X-Men fan then if you grew up on the animated series and a series called Wolverine and Gambit.
Yeah, I did really like that stuff, and I still do, but then, the reason I ended up with that upsettingly high score on that Marvel quiz was because, right when I was 18 and off to university for the first time, I hadn't ever had any nerdy friends. And then this was kind of right at the start of early days of forum culture. And then, so there was a place back in those days called the Marvel Directory. And they had a forum section. So going on there, it became a case of... obsessively learning about the stuff I was interested in and diving through back histories, reading just facts and everything, so that then I could jump into storylines whenever. Because my collecting was still a bit spotty at that point.
Sure. Yeah. I do think it's interesting when you grow up, because I grew up in Anchorage, Alaska. I didn't actually have a comic book friend until I was 24. And it definitely changes your experience of it because it becomes a much more isolated experience. That is one thing that's nice about things like what you were saying, the Marvel Directory, is it kind of expands your horizons and also introduces you to people who are interested in the medium as well. But Ro, you from what I understand, you wanted to work in animation, correct?
I did. When I was really going to be a vet, and then I found out what you had to do to check for cow pregnancies, so that got scrapped. And so then I got into animation, and because I was really into Disney and The Simpsons and stuff. But then when I went to university for an animation course, I realized that if I went into animation, it might kill me because there's way too much work. Because so many panels, frames doing the same thing again and again, just very so slightly differently, I would have gone insane. And so I was able to find a course for comics, and because I enjoyed doing the storyboarding element of the animation course, I figured that comics would be a natural following on point from that.
Sure. Did you have any affinity for comics or background with comics before then?
Not really. I'd read a couple from the local library and stuff, but I wasn't a big comics person, really.
Not a nerd.
Well, a Disney nerd. That's a different flavor of nerd.
Yeah.
I'm a Disney nerd.
But that's where you two met, right? You met in college?
Yeah, we did. Ro joined in the second year after transferring in, and so yeah, it was a small class. It was certainly smaller by that point. Standard attrition rates being what they are. The funniest thing about that was we actually had someone who quit the course the week before the final degree show, which was a truly spectacular level of what the fuck.
Yeah, our tutor didn't realise that had happened until he walked in on a bunch of us raiding his desk. Like, oh, he's not coming back. Well, who wants this ink?
like it was somebody that lost in a duel, and you're like, take his supplies, get his gold coins.
Yeah. Pretty much.
Yep.
That's amazing. Wait, so
our students are feral.
So the course was illustration for graphic novels, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, were you two going to an art school, or was that an extremely specific elective in a general school?
It was the art college of a larger college.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes. The art school itself is 100 years old, but then about 10 years ago was absorbed into the university when that was formed.
Okay. So at that point, I mean, obviously you're both interested in art, and Ro, you didn't get into comics until later. Ted, you had your background. At what point did each of you become interested in? I don't know. I mean, were you kind of always drawing? Was that always something you were both fascinated by?
I was. I don't know about you.
I did it a lot as a teenager, and
Sure.
then about 17, 18, I just dropped off a bit, honestly. There were other things that I was doing, but then.
How do I get a job in this?
Yeah. Well, it was still a case of like I still had that background thing of one day I'd like to make comics, and then I was in my my boring office job, slowly numbing my mind and soul in Excel, and my contract was coming to an end, and then I think about 2 months before my contract was coming to an end, my mother handed me a piece from the Observer newspaper, saying course for graphic novels, and I was like, oh, maybe I should do this.
Yeah. That's great. So, I do think one of the interesting things is about creators is like a lot of times I'll talk to people, and when they're younger, it's like you almost can't really conceptualize the idea that you could do this for a living. It's like something that doesn't really kind of strike your mind. Obviously, like somebody is getting paid for it, but it's in a capacity that a lot of young people don't really understand. After you met, after you kind of started, becoming friends, you started working together and everything to a certain degree. At what point did you realize that you wanted to start not only making comics, but also making comics together?
Well, yeah, I mean, actually, you've got the order of those things very, very backwards.
Oh, okay.
We, because we left university as a couple, but didn't do much with it because we were just we were stymied a bit by getting an illustration agent who then proceeded to not book us any work, and they had non-compete clauses in there, so we couldn't find ourselves any work. And then
that was a weird year.
Yeah. And the one time some comics work showed up for Ro, then she sent it to the agent because they had to okay everything, and they just flat out ghosted it.
Yeah, it was very frustrating.
I imagine.
So it took us a while before any actual stuff happened. But then it was fluke chance really, because we weren't making our lives work in Wrexham, which is where we'd been to university. So we moved back to my mother's house for a couple of months on we'll look for jobs in the surrounding area and find a flat, and then we'll worry about maybe doing comics eventually. And then when I think 2 days after we moved back,
you saw a post on Tumblr by Jeremy Whitley.
Yeah.
Who is the writer and creator of Princeless.
Yeah. And it's just that, kind of tragic thing that does occasionally happen of an artist had to bail on him for personal reasons, and volume 3 of Princeless was overdue, and he was just desperately looking for someone to draw it.
Mm-hmm.
And we both realized quite quickly that we'd never worked together before, but neither one of us would be able to pull off the whole thing on our own.
Yeah. And
so that was it. That was the first time we'd ever worked together, and boy, was that a learning curve.
I read that story ahead of time, and it kind of reminds me of this one quote that I recently read from Brian K. Vaughan. He had an interview, and he was talking about him breaking in, and he said that like breaking into comics is like when there's like a hole in like the hull of a ship, and it's like you have to plug it. But it's like as soon as you plug it, it's like nothing else can get through that. That's kind of what like going through comics is like, or breaking into comics is like, because once somebody goes in through that path, nobody else can. You guys have one of the most unique paths out of anybody, because you basically hadn't worked together and you volunteered for Princeless was a very popular comic. That's a pretty high profile gig. I'm just kind of curious. One thing I didn't really realize or didn't pick up from anything I read about this. What was your reaction once you got it? Was there a little bit of horror when you're like, we have to figure out how to do this now?
Maybe a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
The first issue took a lot longer than the rest of the book did.
Yeah, the first issue took us 2 months. Took over 2 months to make. And we were doing, all the art and the lettering. So there was a fair amount of work, but even so, it was nowhere near the amount of work necessary for the time it took us. It was just... Yeah, I mean, it took us a long time to work out how to frame things on pages properly, and then, exactly make sure all our techniques were at least viable. It was...
Well, there's also the thing that we hadn't really worked with a writer before.
No. So, yeah, it was proper, thrown in at the deep end stuff.
So, I do think one of the interesting things about it is because whenever whenever an artist is on a new project, it's like you have to, there's a learning curve to figuring out exactly how the writer works and exactly how you want to present this comic. But you had additional learning curve in the sense that you had to figure out how you two would work together and how to draw comics effectively, which is, when you were in college. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, we knew some of how to do comics, like, because we had done,
right,
a course for illustration for graphic novels, but
it's very different to actually working on a comic book.
Exactly.
I think, out of all of the members of our year, I had made the most comics pages, because I'd made maybe, and this is the thing, like over 3 years, I'd made maybe 60 or 70 pages of comics.
Mm-hmm.
And that still put me substantially ahead of most of the people in our class.
Mm-hmm.
I was trying to swamp the teachers in a quantity over quality thing.
I probably made less than 30.
Quality makes quantity, though. Nope, that's not how it works. Dang. So one thing I'm curious about is, I think that style can be an overrated thing, like in terms of what actually makes a good comic, because style is it can be a subjective thing, or it's a much more subjective thing. It's like if you can be a good storyteller, you can succeed in comics, while styles, like, they vary and everything. However, given that you were a penciler and inker team, and at that time also coloring and also lettering and everything like that, did you have to... Was there any growing pains in kind of matching your styles or kind of figuring each other's line work out, or was that pretty quick?
There was with Princeless.
Yeah.
Because I was way more cartoony than you had ever done before, and honestly, my anatomy was pretty pants. So there was quite a bit of frustration with that stuff, but after the Princeless stuff, we moved on to the Pirate Princess stuff. I think we started working together a bit more cohesively.
Yeah,
sure.
It was. Yeah, that was a bit more of a easy meshing of things. And these days, it is obviously much more straightforward because we're in year 4 of working together. just coming to the end of year 4.
Oh, wait, I have no idea anymore.
I think it's the end of our 4th year working together now. Probably. Don't quote me.
I find that with things like that, it's just like your brain kind of doesn't remember times before it. Like when my wife is like, "How long have we been together?" I'm like, "I don't remember. It was just X amount of time."
I'm so glad that there are other people out there who have this problem, because, you know, it's not something we talk about with people a lot. But then, you know, so it's all, you get media presentations of relationships where if one of the partners forgets how long it's been, the other one's really mad, like it's something you're supposed to know. We've got no clue.
Oh, no. I mean, honestly, like my wife and I, we have like, you know, kind of 3 main, you know, kind of milestones in our relationship. We got together, we got married, and then we also bought a house. I could not tell you with any certainty even what year those took place in. And I'm like, whatever. We're happy. It's been going on for a while. It's cool. But you know, it's as long as you're happy, it's overrated how long it's been. It still works.
I mean, you have the marriage in the house. It doesn't really matter.
Exactly when it happened. Yeah. I do want to talk about how your process has evolved, because obviously when it first started, you were doing a lot more. So how has your process evolved from Princeless to Crowded? Because if I remember from what I read, Ted, you were initially doing layouts, right?
I did all the layouts on Princeless.
Yeah.
Then it started. Then that Pirate Princess was when we started working together on layouts, which is something that has absolutely remained. Although the way we work together on layouts has changed. Because these days, I started out just doing the layouts. Then we kind of were trying to figure them out together. And now what generally happens is because the thing that makes us a really good team is we have quite complementary learning difficulties.
Sure.
That's a very weird way of putting it, isn't it?
But it's true.
Yeah. We have blind spots that match up quite well with what the other one can do.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
So I'm better at big picture stuff and Ro's better at detail stuff, which means when it comes to carving out pages, I can usually get a good instinctual grasp of how to break down the paneling, working out the sizes and exact shapes of the panels, and then Ro will go in and explicitly call the shots within the spaces that I've defined. So
you also have to do quite a bit of explaining for me, because I have some comprehension problems with some ways things are written. So I sometimes don't understand what exactly specifically is meant to be happening on a page, and Ted can find a way to explain that for me.
I'll usually bullet point out exactly what needs to be happening in each panel. So
you're like the big picture translator.
Yeah, and then Ro does all the useful stuff.
I have to say that I've looked at a lot of comic creator sites, and you two have one of my favorite lines out of any comic creator site, because you describe yourselves as a cartoonist split into 2 people. It's very good.
Thank you. I mean, it's the most appropriate, because like it really does feel like in every level that we are 2 halves of one person.
Mm-hmm.
That also helps with our website tagline kind of thing as well. Because Stein isn't my real name. And I was coming because I wanted to have a pen name. Because when I say my real name, I just sound like I have a terrible cold every single time. And we couldn't think of a name for the website either. And so we ended up coming up eventually with Brandt and Stein.
Ooh, yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and it's great, because then you've either got the cheesy pun, or if you use a fancy font, it can look very formal. So
yeah.
It's all purpose.
I do have to admit, I had a very weird conundrum, because I do a lot of research before doing these interviews, and I was looking for Rose Stein interviews. I'm like, how has she done no interviews? And then I was like, oh, okay, her non-pen name. And it was funny, because when did you stop using that name for professionally?
Just after we finished working on Pirate Princess.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
so we started doing Marvel work and those other things.
When there was a greater risk of you having to talk to people about stuff and say your name.
Yeah.
I'm sorry for making you do that.
Oh no, it's fine. I haven't actually had to say my name.
Oh, that's true.
That's true.
I do think that one thing that's really great about, because I know that you've done some stuff with Kieran Gillen and Jamie McKelvey's work. You did a B, what was it, B-side? Yeah. Anyways, I remember you did that. But one of my other favorite terms that anybody has come up with is, I believe that Kieran came up with the idea of them being the faux cartoonist. And that's another really good one. The nice thing about you two working together is that I do think that one of the interesting things about talking about art for a layman such as myself, or even a comic reviewer, is it can be really tough to pin down attribution for who did what. And the two of you really do complement each other completely. And it's like you're almost inseparable, even though you do have delineated roles. Yeah,
I mean, for the crowded trade, Chris was asking us how we wanted to be credited, and was offering up Stein and Ted Brandt, on one line with the pencils plus inks credit, and we actually just said scrap that and put line art in.
Yeah.
It's really difficult to look at anything and see exactly which of us did what, because there's very few things where you can separate out anything and say, well, like, it was just strictly on the job roles here of Ro came up with that and penciled it and I inked it. It's almost never that simple.
Well, and I imagine there's a lot of communication between the two of you when it comes to approaching pages, approaching issues, approaching specific parts. Even though you kind of fill each other's gaps, I mean, is there an ongoing communication between you during the process of, breaking it down an issue, basically?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Even to the point where I'm drawing stuff, I often have to get pose Ted and take a photo for reference. So he's that far into the artwork.
Yeah, I am 90% of the bodies you'll see in Crowded on some level or another.
You have to do some very interesting poses, I have to admit.
Yeah, and let me tell you, I am not the most flexible individual, so some of them can really hurt.
Ro, if I was there, you'd be in deep trouble, because I'm probably half as flexible as Ted. I am completely inflexible. That is actually that's kind of like a performance enhancing drug for the two of you, because having somebody to do photo reference for you, I don't know if you've looked at Paulo Rivera's blog, the artist, but on his blog he shares a lot of the photo reference he takes of himself, and he takes some pretty hilarious stuff, but that also means that he can't be drawing while he's doing the photo reference. He has to go and set up a camera and do all of this. You have Ted to do it for you. It's perfect.
It is very, very handy.
And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I want to take a quick break to talk about my friends at Radio vs. the Martians. Mike Gillis and Casey Doran host the Radio vs. the Martians podcast, a show that gathers their funniest, smartest friends once a month for a deep dive into science fiction, video games, horror, comics, movies, and everything in between. So far, they've dissected topics like Superman, Steven Spielberg, Akira, George Lucas, zombies, Twin Peaks, Hayao Miyazaki, James Bond, Watchmen, and whether drivers are required to pull over for the Ghostbusters. Find this podcast and its spin-off show, Podcast a la Vista, baby, a celebration of the films of thespian and statesman Arnold Schwarzenegger, on iTunes, Stitcher, and at radioversusthemartians.com. And now, back to the show. So when you two removed, when you stopped doing the coloring and lettering portion, was there anything you lost, like any part of your process that you kind of had to relearn by losing that, or was that something that you could just kind of excise and focus on the line art and you were fine?
I don't know, really.
No, I mean, we did around the time we stopped coloring. That was also when my Wacom Cintiq companion died, so I was moving into
traditional,
physical inks, simply because I couldn't afford a replacement.
Sure.
So there might well have been something that we lost by stopping coloring, but then there was also loads of other stuff happening at the same time. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, it definitely made things quicker.
Mm-hmm. I imagine.
There's also that thing of having to give up some control as
Yeah.
well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's one of the things that you do have to be less precious, because you don't necessarily have a say over who's colouring your work.
Sure.
Which is one of the reasons why Crowded's be great, because Chris actually asked us if we had any suggestions for who we wanted to colour us, and we immediately said we wanted Tree, and so that worked out really well.
Yeah, and she's a fantastic colorist. I love seeing her work, kind of come up over the recent years, because it's kind of astonishing how quick she's become just a genuine, like, great in the coloring game.
Yeah, it's astonishingly fast.
Working on so many different things. It's insane.
It is, yeah.
Which is one of the reasons why I think it has allowed her career to really blossom, precisely because she's unbelievably hardworking.
Didn't she kind of came up working with Jordi Belair, right?
She was one of Geordie's earlier mentees.
Yeah. I feel like that comes from Jordi. Jordi is like the queen of colorists. I don't want to say workaholic, because that seems insulting, but let's just say she's prolific. And that's good. I mean, for a colorist, you get more work out there. You get to, get your voice in the comics and everything, that start figuring things out more on the page. I mean, I think that's fantastic. But I do want to ask a couple more questions about process before we jump into credit. One of the things I read, I was reading about some of your influences, and two of them kind of stood out, especially considering the fact that to a certain degree they're a bit different than each other. One was specifically David Aja's Hawkeye work, and then the other one was Stuart Immonen in a broader sense. Stuart Immonen in particular for Crowded. What is it about those two that is an influence for the both of you?
Well, you always want to talk about Stuart.
I always want to talk about Stuart, so I'm there with you.
Yeah, I'll spare your readers, your listeners, what could be a many-day rant about how Stuart's great. But I mean, the thing that I've tried to bring in from all of Stuart's work is his command of the page. It's the idea that everything that's happening is absolutely serving a perfect purpose, and that he's really good at apportioning space,
mm-hmm.
which has been a really big thing, because obviously, like, in terms of crude end user experience in terms of the style, there's not much of Stuart actually in the work, but it's more a case of trying to think, what would he do when we're in the nuts and bolts stage?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like he's more of like a macro influence. Like when you're working on the page or like thinking about the layout, it's like, how could you have all these elements impact each other? And that's the Stuart in you.
Yeah. I mean, because he is just the undisputed master of storytelling, really, in terms of the modern greats.
Yeah, I'm actually like literally doing this podcast with the hardcovers of Next Wave sitting right next to me, so I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
What about David?
Is it something to do with like the clarity of his action?
Yeah, he's really good at finding that moment.
Yeah, and also, so you always know exactly what is happening.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's always really good at not pushing action so far that it becomes superhero style ridiculous, but it's always just enough to really sell it as a real thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his work on Hawkeye, I mean, part of it was the fundamental nature of the book, that most of it was like taking place in apartments, and a lot of it was conversations, and some of it was just a dog. And like all of that, I think really brought out his strengths in an incredible way. I like the fact that you have kind of the micro and the macro artists that are influences for the both of you. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there are a lot more in general, but
sure.
They're definitely two of the ones that we were really trying to think of on Crowded. And then, I mean, it's while those were two of the primary ones, obviously it's a very expanding list, because anytime we see someone doing something that looks really good, go, ooh, how would that work for us? Like, what would our version of that look like?
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense. It's kind of like, I think influences are a funny thing because it's hard to really even sometimes label influences because you don't really think about something being an influence and then it appears and you're just like, oh wait, that is kind of like that. How did that even get my brain? Like there's probably like the inputs that are coming to your brain, whether it's like film or TV or, anything really, like it can still impact your art without you really even being cognizant of it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like we do try and watch a reasonably broad variety of things in terms of media and visual genres of them, not necessarily storytelling genres, but try and get as many different styles of production on the things that we watch, so it does give a good broad aesthetic.
Sure. I do really enjoy that both Parks and Recreation and The Good Place are apparently in some way an influence for Crowded, just because The Good Place is kind of like everywhere in the book to a certain degree. I mean, there's literally the trolley problem at one point. And
Yep.
And then I read in an interview that when Chris posed the idea of like this comic is like 10 minutes in the future, you thought of season 7 of Parks and Recreation, which is pretty genius.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was, I think, the most comfortable conception we've seen yet of near future.
Yeah. They're fantastic tech.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But all that tech was using relatively old by the time the show was made ideas. Like people have been talking about phones like that for over a decade.
Oh,
so it wasn't revolutionary. It was a comfortable evolution of what we've got now, which is what we've tried to show in the world. Like, because when everyone visualizes the future, it's all very easy to think of everything as a gleaming spire and all that. But actually, capitalism is inherently cheap. We're not going to burn down and rebuild anything that we can get away with
cobbling extra bits onto.
Yeah, or throwing a cheap coat of paint on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you guys gave me a good reason to. I was like, last night I was about to go to bed and I was like, you know what? I need to do a little bit more research. I'm going to watch a season 7 episode of Parks and Rec just to refresh. And I was like, yay, Parks and Rec. This makes me happy. So thank you for that. So let's jump into Crowded and how it came together. I think that I love Crowded. I think it's a fantastic book. The whole team is great. I knew I was at Image Expo when Chris announced it, and I just remember hearing the idea and laughing. Just the whole concept of, an app for assassination and then the app for, defend for hiring somebody to protect you and everything like that. And like this like kind of funhouse mirror version of our world and how you could use that to build out a real amazing character story. And the execution is far superior even to the idea. How did the book come together and how did you first get involved with it?
We were looking for work, and you were complaining to Juliet. Yeah,
because it was that thing of like, while we'd gotten a foot in the door at Marvel, that was all we ever got.
Right.
We just didn't succeed in wedging it any further for whatever reason. Like, we just weren't what they were looking for. But the problem is, at that point, we weren't what anyone was looking for. So we were getting a bit desperate because being in comics, you don't have a lot of savings to fall back on when there isn't work.
Sure.
So, I already was friends with Juliet anyway. We had been, talking for a couple of years while we'd been doing Pirate Princess and everything.
This is Juliet Capra?
Yes. Yeah. Our editor and
yes.
comics retailer.
Mm-hmm.
And so then, it was because she's been a comics retailer for a long time. She knows a lot of creators.
Mm-hmm.
And then one day, like when we were discussing how rough it was, she said, "Oh, well, my friend Chris is
looking for artists.
Yeah, he's got a bunch of pitches that he wants to send out. Like, do you want to talk to him?" Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. I have to admit, I've always, for a long time, I didn't know her last name. I actually think it might have been Crowded that came out of it. I just knew her as Elusive J because of Twitter. And it's funny how that works. It's like, a person in kind of their taste, but I mean, I didn't even know her name. I was just like, oh, it's Elusive J. So at that point, how did you did you just basically send Chris some art and then it was merry on your way?
Not even that. I just had a Skype call.
Yeah, like we had a Skype call and
I do not remember sending Chris anything.
We didn't.
No.
He was just like, okay.
Yeah. So he just kind of like, I imagine he must have done some background research on us because then we arranged a Skype call and he said, I'd like to work with you. So, like, I mean, unless Juliet's word is very persuasive, I imagine he did some background checking. Mm-hmm. But then, so he told us he had a list of 5 pitches that he had ready enough to be developed soon.
And Crowd was the second on the list, and we didn't get any further down it.
No.
Oh.
The first was Cold War, which, after seeing the job Hayden Sherman did, I'm very glad we passed because he did that book way better than we ever did.
Yeah, I feel like Shanghai Red would have been an interesting one for you too also. Not exactly similar styles to Josh Hickson.
Yeah. But, I mean, that was never on the table because...
that was already in production.
Yeah.
Oh, it was already in production.
Josh started that over 4 years ago.
Whoa. See, that's the funny thing about comics is like they were announced the same day and one was in production 4 years before. You never know.
Yeah. No, it's like you never know what's happening behind the scenes. But so like Rose said, then there was a list of 5, and as soon as we heard the second one, we said, that's it, we're doing that.
We can make that completely ridiculous, we're taking it.
So when you actually were signed up for the project and you started working on it, what were you trying to bring to the book from an approach standpoint with like page layouts and storytelling? Was there a specific feel you brought to this book, or is it just kind of the Ro and Ted feel that you were bringing to the book?
Well, you had been reading Born Again.
Yeah.
At the time.
Yeah, the Mazzucchelli Artist Edition.
Yeah.
So you wanted to bring in some of the old style type bang for your buck on the page type thing.
Yeah, it was that idea of old story density. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of panels per page, and
we might not be quite old story, but we've certainly got density.
Yeah. So, and one of the things, the other things was that, like, because of our aforementioned brain weirds, then, like, sometimes reading the scripts can be a bit sort of like sometimes we can find it hard to make intuitive leaps from like the description of each panel to the next one. Mm-hmm. So
we have to split up the action.
Yeah, adding the panels in made it much easier to get like dramatic beats going better, or like most of the slapstick, certainly in the early issues before Chris adjusted, almost all of the slapstick was purely our invention. Mm-hmm. Like once Chris had gotten his head around it and started having fun with the book, then it became much more of a team effort. But we were pushing the humor stuff earlier than Chris was, and the breaking down of the panels, adding in those moments, allowed for heightened drama and laughs. Really, mm-hmm. Is that kind of one of the things we were thinking about was like just those old Buster Keaton clips that you see floating around the internet, because the comedy timing on them was impeccable. Mm-hmm. It's still untouchable now, which is a hell of a legacy. And we may not be able to say that in 70 years, but at the very least, we're trying to, trying to make it as fun as it can be for the reader and as easy to read. That was the other thing. As complicated as it is, we were trying to make a book that if it was your first comic, you could pick it up and it would be clear enough how to read it.
Mm-hmm. So early on, Chris wasn't really leaning into the comedic elements quite as much. Why did the two of you want to do that? Why did you want to bring those elements and that slapstick in it from the start?
We like comedy. We can't really do anything too serious in life generally.
Yeah, we are very unserious people.
Yeah.
Is that's the most charitable way I can phrase that, I think.
Well, the thing I really appreciate about what the two of you do as far as like the comedic visuals is a lot of it is it's not heavy or anything like that. Like in some of the stuff maybe I'm just weird and I find some of the stuff funny, but like when in the first issue when oh my God, Charlie is showing down against the old woman on the street who has the dog and she has the gun. And like, there's something about the character of the older woman that just, and the height difference between the two of them that is inherently very amusing to me. And I don't know what it is about it. And it's some of your character design and everything, but I like the fact that you have, there's slapstick, but there's a lot of subtlety to it. I think maybe partially it's because you two are clearly Good Place fans, and you like to inject Easter eggs into the book. It seems like you had in I think it was issue 6, you had Longer Than Life in there. Is that a you thing, or is that coming from Chris?
We do all of the background signage. Chris just lets us go with it.
Did he request Danny DeVito to be in the library?
Nope.
He did not.
I was like, oh God, because of this angle I've picked, I need a really short person. So who is funny looking that's really short? Danny DeVito is in the library.
That's amazing. Yeah, no, it's fun reading. I was actually rereading the book last night and coming across a lot of the details that I missed the first time was really funny. I love the fact. Are you two caught up on the Good Place at all?
Yes.
Okay. Well, they had the foot logger this week, and then when I was reading through and I saw Longer Than Life, I'm like, you guys are nailing this. This is amazing. You're ahead of Michael Schur. This is unbelievable.
I know the background gags of the store names is one of my single biggest joys.
One of my favorite gags is on Charlie's TiVo.
Oh, yeah. Supernatural.
Yeah.
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 400 and something episodes of Supernatural to watch. Yep.
I just love that no matter where we are as a society, we will always have Supernatural.
That thing won't die.
It's immortal. It's unbelievable. I mean, how many seasons has that been on? It's crazy.
It's on. I think it's currently on 14.
Is it possible that those two brothers don't age?
Not much.
I mean, Jensen Ackles looks pretty much the same as he did when he was in Smallville.
Yeah, Jensen Ackles doesn't age.
Yeah.
Jared just gets bigger.
Like bigger, like eating too much, or just like
working
muscles.
out too much.
Oh, okay.
And yeah,
like if we go on like kind of track his muscle growth, and plot a graph out, then by around season 25, then
he'll be the Hulk.
Yeah, he should be approximately 3 times Jensen's size.
And he's just going to start saying like really Hulk-like lines. Like, I don't know what his character name is, but I just imagine he's going to say his name in Smash a whole lot. And for some reason, he's wearing purple pants.
Yeah.
At that point, I would probably watch the show. I'm not going to lie. I'm surprised that because Supernatural seems like it has a pretty intense fandom.
Oh yeah.
I'm kind of surprised that no one's ever charted his muscle growth, because it seems like an obvious angle to go with.
No, they were more interested in charting his hair growth.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
There is a whole subsection that's all about that.
And his sideburns.
Is it always growing bigger? Or is it just receding, growing?
Getting longer and bigger and shaggier and more like a mane. I think at like season 10, I think he got a haircut to make it maintain back a bit, and everyone was like, ah.
I like to think the producers had to come to him and be like, you need to get a haircut. This is getting ridiculous. He just wasn't cutting his hair. Yeah, I have to admit, like with things like the Supernatural one, I wasn't sure if that came from you two or if that came from Chris. There's some... Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, the only TiVo gag that was in there was a limb adoption from Chris. All the rest of those we put in. Yeah,
there's a lot of like the weird futuristic stuff in there is funny because it really is the 10 minutes in the future thing. Like Chris had hot dog fusion, and I Googled it after I saw that. I was like, I wonder if this is a real thing. And it was a real thing. And it was kind of disturbing because I've never thought about having hot dogs as a fusion food, like just putting, I don't know, There was a lot of very odd stuff that I found on the internet involving hot dog fusion. I told Chris that, and I think he was a little disappointed that his creation was actually real.
He's worryingly plugged into what's around the corner, partly because like all of the apps that are in use in the book are technically available in some form or another right now.
Apart from the assassination.
Apart from Reaper. But like all of the others on some level are available right now. So it's like he is very good at being just on the edge of that curve.
I wonder if there's a dark web app.
Oh,
that's like that.
Probably.
I feel like this probably comes from the fact that he watches, near as I can tell, every single Netflix documentary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite a few of the ones on Amazon by the sound of things.
He actually turned me on to a cat documentary called Catwalk, which was very, very amusing. So I'm glad that he did that. And now, a word from our sponsor. Yo, everybody. I'd like to take a minute to talk about our sponsors over at Impact Theory Comics. Impact Theory Comics is a new independent publisher, and they're releasing their first comic, Neon Future. Neon Future is a collaboration with world-famous DJ and producer Steve Aoki, and is written by the Eisner Award-winning writer of Justice, Jim Kruger, with artists Neil Edwards of Fantastic Four fame and Jeremy Rappak delivering the visuals and building the world. Want a first look at the book and Neil and Jeremy's art? Give Impact Theory a follow on Instagram at IT Comics. If you like what you see and you're a fan of science fiction, this might be the comic for you. So head over to your local comic book shop and get Neon Future #1 on your pull list ASAP. And now, back to the show. Back to the art. I did want to ask a question for you, Ro, about how your animation background has, whether or not you found a place for it in this book, because as you two said, it does have a slapstick vibe to it. There's some cartoonish energy at times, especially during something like Trotter's plan in issue number 6 when he's laying it out. I mean, that is just like straight up cartoon energy through and through. How have you been able to bring some of your animation love and kind of that feel to this book a little bit more than you have on other projects?
I think as I go, I'm getting it more into it and stuff. Because one of the best lessons I had from the animation course was about making pleasing shapes. And so what I always want to try and do is make sure that it's got an interesting silhouette for anything, even if it's not actually seen as a silhouette. And you still have to deal with some tangents and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But I tried to make sure that it's not too terrible. But yeah, it's all about the shapes and the kinetic energy and stuff. And recently I watched a whole bunch of videos on YouTube for anatomy, which will hopefully help, by a guy called Prokopenko. They're really helpful videos for anyone who wants to learn about anatomy and stuff. Because I'm hoping to be able to improve the way I'm doing stuff by having a better understanding of the anatomy, but plugged into the more cartoony bodywork that I know of.
Yeah, it's a case of knowing the rules and then breaking them better.
Yes, exactly.
I do like, with Charlie and Vita, the two main characters, there's a nice contrast to their body types. But Charlie is kind of an interesting character because she seems like her look in certain situations kind of evolves almost as much as her personality. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm not like, oh, you can't keep body types right or anything like that. But she just seems like such an amorphous person in general that you almost kind of realize that visually with her. And I really like that.
I think a lot of that is also to do with how she keeps wearing the different things.
Yes.
That can help change how certain parts look and as well and stuff.
Yeah, whereas Vita's very much stuck in her ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
She's very rigid and on the narrow for the most part. But when it came to designing the cast, particularly Charlie and Vita, what did Chris give you two any specific ideas, or was it really just you two finding the right look for these two characters?
He gave us not physical descriptions, but emotional ones of them.
Okay.
So, he gave us a rundown of who they are. Rather than focusing on like, I think the only note we got in the very early stages was that they wanted Charlie to be white because, like, because her behaviors are very that of a very privileged person, and
Sure.
they didn't want to run into any difficulties there, but like, and be insensitive at all. But apart from that, like, that was the only real notes that we got, and I think both of the versions that made it into the book are the second drafts.
Yeah.
And they look nothing like either of the firsts.
No.
Interesting. So what did you start with?
Vita kind of looked like one of the characters from Dirk Gently.
Okay.
Yeah. The Netflix version, there's
Farah,
yeah,
wasn't it? She looks a bit like Farah.
She was a badass agent of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
And so Vita looked more like her and was wearing a hoodie in the first draft.
Vita's coat was a very good choice. Very good choice. I would wear that coat. It's a very nice coat.
Yeah, I am very fond of that.
Yeah, you did a good job with that.
It's reminiscent of Beatrix Kiddo's coat and not really, but at the same time, it reminds me of like the kind of tracksuit that she wears at times in Kill Bill.
Yeah, that was definitely part of the
like a combination of that, and is it Jet Li?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like that was the sort of thing that we were looking for with the jacket. I mean, like, 'cause it's another one of those weird divisions where I designed Vita and Ro designed Charlie.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. And who designed the dog?
Ro.
That was me.
Definitely. 100%.
It was like, it needs to be this small dog, and I was like, because I'd seen pictures of teacup chihuahuas, which are grotesque. I was like, it has to be one of those.
I have to say that in the first issue, there's the scene when they're about to go to bed, and I think Vita picks up the dog and is like, basically like, don't destroy anything or don't go to the bathroom or something like that. And she looks at the dog, and the dog's got this like head cocked, mouth open, ears huge, and everything like that. And it's just such an endearing moment. And then I think one of the next panels is Vita sleeping, and the dog has its head on her shoulder. And I don't know what it was about that moment, but it instantaneously sold me on Vita as a person, because it's like this dog bought into her completely, and it was a very nice, subtle bit of storytelling, and also the dog was hilarious.
Oh, I do enjoy drawing dog. So often he has to be so small.
so small. I have to admit, there's sometimes when you watch movies, or if you read a story or anything like that where they have an animal character in it, you feel like you don't really care about the human characters. You just want the animals to survive. That's not the case in Crowded, but I am inexplicably invested in dogs' health.
Oh, don't worry, you are not alone there. I mean, there's a reason why the only character that Chris is willing to guarantee the safety of is Dog.
Oh, nice. That's good.
Everyone else is on the table.
This is very random, but did you watch the movie Bird Box?
No.
Okay.
That's the Sandra Bullock Netflix one.
Yeah. First off, it's not great. Second off, there really are birds in a box. And maybe this will say something, but the only characters I was really invested in surviving were the birds in the box. I was like, come on, birds, you got to make it, please. So take that how you will for the movie, but I was very invested in the bird survival.
Yeah, well, we're definitely invested in Dog, don't worry.
Good. So when it came to actually working on the book, and when laying out the pages and everything like that, it sounds like you were going for a very panel-heavy look. How flexible was Chris when it came to the scripts? Was he really open to you doing what you will, as long as like the core of everything was in there?
Oh yeah, he's really, really awesome with all of that. Like, I mean, up to and including letting us reshuffle dialogue into different panels so it makes more sense with the new layout. He absolutely trusted us to know what we were doing, which, in retrospect, was probably a terrible idea.
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that I really appreciate about the book, especially on the reread, was all the subtleties you really bake in there. It's not just the page layouts and how you approach the story, but one thing that really stood out when I was rereading it was the creative choices you made on sound effects. Like the gunfire, and there's this one scene when perfume is being squeezed, and it's like the puff comes out, and there's a sound associated with it in the puff. That type of stuff is I mean, it's like impossible to script for, but you two added in, and it just adds a lot to the story and to the comic, and just, I don't know, I really enjoy that kind of thing.
Well, I'm glad, because the design of a lot of them is Rose.
Yeah.
But, sometimes it's very hard because you get given a sound effect. It's like, I have no idea how to make this as a thing.
Yeah. But the reason that we do them at all was because I was a huge fan of Frank Whiteley's 3 issues of Batman and Robin, where all of his sound effects were diegetic in there, and it really adds something. It just makes the world feel that bit richer. And because I absolutely am blown away by what a lot of letterers can do with SFX stuff. There are some truly stunning people out there for that sort of thing, but that was another part of the kind of slightly more classic feel for us. Like that idea of, oh, actually, if we have all the SFX on the page, it's just baked into the whole thing. It feels more natural somehow.
No, I totally agree. I think that when it matches the line artist's work in hand and everything, it feels so much more cohesive with the rest of it. And that's of course that's not a dig at letterers, because a lot of letterers do incredible work with it, but there's a feel there that really makes it feel a lot more cohesive to me.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And like I said, there are plenty of letterers out there whose SFX work absolutely blows me away, but this is just it. It's a very different beast, and one that they couldn't do by necessity. Which is why it has been quite funny seeing some people credit the diegetic SFX to our letterer.
Isn't that Ariana?
No,
sorry.
Cardinal Ray.
Oh, Cardinal Ray. Sorry, oh my God, I mixed up a letter. I am so sorry to both Ariana Marr and Cardinal Ray. My bad.
But so I have seen a couple of people credit the diegetic SFX to Cardinal. It's like, I mean, how would that even work?
Right.
I'm just thinking of when with the trolley problem, and there's a sound effect of the blood spatter coming out of the guy's throat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I don't know how that would have been done by someone else putting it in afterwards.
I mean, cause if nothing else, the average letterer is far too overworked to then have to waste so much time matching up all of that stuff that they'd need to do.
Well, and the other thing too is I don't know. I always feel that, when you look at sound effects done by a letterer and you look at a sound effect done by the artist, you can see the artist's line in it when you're looking at it. And it's so clearly different than what the letterer is doing. I don't know. To me, I've long had a theory, and I have no idea what your guys' handwriting looks like, but I feel like the handwriting of an artist looks very similar. Like I could pick it out based off of their line art.
You could definitely pick the two of us out.
Yeah.
Really?
Based on the pencils and inks.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
My handwriting's quite round, and yours is quite spiky.
Yeah.
Well, this all kind of goes back to that attribution issue that I was talking about, where it's kind of hard to discern exactly who does what. My blanket rule when it comes to reviews or it comes to anything like that, talking online, is don't make assumptions, because you never really know exactly who did it. At the same time, with something like that, I probably would have assumed the line artist did it. But
yeah.
Do you feel? I think one of the interesting things about you two is that we're in an era of less specialization in comics. Most line artists are single people. Like most people do pencil and inking. I don't know if that's a money thing or if it's a control thing or what. But I remember when I was growing up, it was just inkers were lousy in the comic industry, and now it's kind of more of a highly specialized craft. I don't know. I mean, I don't even really know if I have a question here so much as I do think it's interesting that you're a penciler and inker duo in an era of less specialization. It's an atypical combination, and I love that it works for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why there has been that depreciation in number of inkers is because, as far as I know, like rates haven't gone up much at all. So, like with inflation on currency and everything like that, then it's and with the proliferation of digital as well, meaning that you can, between those two things, it's much more economical for the average line artist to ink themselves. Mm-hmm. I personally think that's really regrettable because, because
a comic book is a conversation, and if you take out the inker, you're missing a chunk of the conversation.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. I use this example a lot, but it's a really good one, which is the first. So I've got the the old Marvel Essentials books. It's just the black and white reprints.
Yeah, like the big black like phone books.
Yeah, exactly. The best one of those for looking at what an inker can do is the first volume of Essential Wolverine, because that's almost exclusively penciled by John Buscema. But in it, he's inked by Al Williamson, Klaus Janson, and Bill Sankovich.
Oh, wow. Wow.
I mean, three unbelievably good inkers just in general.
Also much different inkers.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's fascinating to see, because then you've got a perfect side-by-side comparison of how each of them responds to Buscema's work.
Mm-hmm.
And I could go on for days about the subtleties and differences of what each of the three inkers brought to it. And it's because it just highlights that, like Rose said, comics are a conversation. It's a team sport where everybody is, everybody's reacting to what the earlier people have done. And taking a step out of that, it's fine. Of course it is. And there are plenty of people who ink themselves and do great stuff. But that still doesn't convince me, for all that they look great, when with the line art they hand in, that they couldn't look even better with an inker. And it's difficult to talk about this stuff because, being an inker, that makes me sound inherently selfish, like I'm just trying to convince people to hire me. But no, your work looks terrible. You should definitely have an inker. It really isn't that. It's just, it's a thing of wanting comics to be all they can be and embrace the uniqueness of the medium.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I really love it when you see, I've seen examples where, you have like 4 different inkers who draw, or who ink over one specific artist and one specific piece, and you can see the differences. Like there's this level of interpretation that speaks to what Ro is talking about with the conversation, where it's, the script comes out. If you gave the script to 10 different artists, line artists, pencilers, you're going to get 10 different things. And then if you gave those 10 to 10 different inkers, you're going to get 100 different things. And then if you give it to 10 different colorists, you're going to get 1,000 different things, because there's so many different ways you can interpret each of these different things. There's no, if you gave Tree an issue of Crowded, but you gave Matt Wilson the same issue of Crowded, those books would look completely different. Like, that's just...
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and it works in all capacities. And I do agree with you. I do think that there's some... Especially when you look at Marvel and DC comics, when you see somebody who is inked by somebody that does not complement them well, it stands out, and you're just like, initially you're like, what is wrong with this line artist? What is wrong with this penciler? But it's actually the inker that's changing their work, and it's really fascinating how like we can't even really appreciate the subtlety that all these different roles change the books, but it's there and you can feel it.
Yeah, I mean, I love inking as a craft. I'm still only in the shallow end of learning about it. Absolutely, I'm but it's absolutely fascinating. I love just thinking about like different ways that other people might do it, and do my job, and then maybe trying to incorporate a bit of that in as well. Because if Roe was inked by other people, there are so many things that would be different about it.
For one thing, I don't think they'd be able to read it.
Are you super super rough in your pencils?
I'm a messy penciler.
Yeah, I mean, there's plenty of detail. It's not rough, but it's
sloppy.
Yeah, that's a better way of putting it.
Well,
you just didn't want to say it.
It would make you look rude.
It's funny though, because you look at Chris Somney's art, and you would think this is a guy who, I mean, he's very Toth influenced, very tight, very minimalist, and everything like that. His pencils are super sloppy, according to him. And
I have seen his pencils.
Oh yeah,
they're what most people would call roughs.
Exactly.
Because he's doing that thing of inking himself, all that. Really, he's just drawing in the ink.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, everything else is all the previous stuff is just shaping. Really, it's incredible to see what he's capable of doing in that regard.
Yeah, I love seeing what not in the specialization world, but when somebody is able to kind of really do everything in the inking phase and is just kind of doing layouts or roughs with that, that's pretty interesting. And then on the flip side, you have somebody like Jeff Darrow. I don't know if you've ever seen any of Jeff Darrow stuff, but everything is figured out in pencils. He has an art book called Lead Poisoning that shows his pencils on things like Shaolin Cowboy. And it is one of the most staggering things you will ever see. And you're like, kind of a combination of how and why do you draw to this detail in pencils? But he is, I mean, that dude goes through a lot of lead. Let's just say that.
Yeah, I mean, his work is staggeringly detailed. So, like, I had no idea that it was like that at every single stage.
Oh yeah, yeah. I imagine it's a rigorous process. Also, I kind of feel bad. He has went through a few colors, and it's you can guess why. There's a lot of detail to sort out in there.
Yeah, I mean, we always feel a bit guilty because Tree has told us that she has to pay her flatters a little extra to deal with Crowded.
I did want to ask one other question in regards to you working together, and that's also that you live together, that you're a couple. And is there any impact there? Like, I don't know, because it's one thing if, Jim Lee and Scott Williams or something decided that they like got grumpy with each other. They would just go to their separate homes and be like, screw that guy. Not that ever happens. I'm sure Jim and Scott are super happy all the time. But is that ever an impact, or is that just so part of your relationship and who you are that it's kind of just part of your flow?
Sometimes there is stress, and it's less that we get angry at each other or anything, but it can be very difficult if one of us is having a hard time for the other one to help them and deal with it properly. It can be tricky, but we work through it.
Yeah, I mean, the key to managing this is exactly the same as every other relationship, just communication.
Yeah.
As long as we keep talking about stuff as we're doing it, then sooner or later everything gets sorted out.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like I totally agree. Like that's one of the things. I feel like quite often the stuff that gets bad for a lot of people who both work together and are in relationships or simultaneously is that they just bury it instead of dealing with it. And like, if you don't communicate about it, it's just like, oh, like maybe it was something stupid and you like, this is like an unnecessary thing to be unhappy about. So that's good. That the communication is key.
Oh yeah.
Oh, we have to do that because neither of us are very good at hiding if we're pissed at each other.
No, we're both quite heart on sleeve people, so that does help.
So the other one will, if someone senses a problem, they'll drag it out of them.
Yeah, there's nowhere to hide with this sort of stuff. So it's refreshingly easy to do on that level. It keeps you honest.
That's good. That's good. Last question I want to ask about. I really, you have a amazing group of variant artists, but I really enjoy your covers. Your covers are great. As number 2, I particularly liked in the. I don't even know how you describe it. They have like the paper versions of the different characters in front of the house.
Oh yeah,
like that. That's a really fun one. It's a great little idea. What is your approach with covers and like both conceptualizing, but also like what you're trying to do on them?
For that one in particular, I actually made a little version of that.
Oh my god, that's amazing!
To take a photo to try and see how that would work properly.
Mm-hmm. I mean, like conceptualizing covers is idiosyncratic. No two of them have been designed in the same way.
Sure,
it's like because I'll tell you a secret. We're not very good at this. We don't know what we're doing. So every time,
how about this?
Yeah, every time Chris gives us like the issue synopsis says, "Oh, we need a cover fairly soon." We just panic and go,
"This might be
cool." You guys are very good at hiding it. It seems like you know what you're doing.
But
oh, good.
Yeah, it's a relief. I think my favorite cover was number 3.
It's a good one.
Oh, the one, the reflection in the glasses.
Yeah, trying to like. So, the second cover, we were trying to figure out a way of evoking the idea that, maybe Charlie isn't all she seems and she's pulling strings a bit. Mm-hmm. And so having her kind of looming over this
storybook version.
Yeah, storybook version of her perfect bodyguard protecting her against the terrible people. Like, yeah, so there was that. And then like the third one was, I think, about like the like kind of looming threat, the idea like, because even though the focus is on Charlie and Vita being shot at in their car, then we're still seeing it reflected in Cersei's glasses. She's dangerously close to them to the point where she can just see them.
I think my favourite one we did was for 4 actually.
Okay.
Done with all the trotters in the TVs.
Yeah, well, that was very easy for you compared to me.
Oh yeah. Copy and paste, bitches.
Trotter is he is an interesting character. Mostly, I mean, he's just like, I don't know. I imagine you guys just like Googled pictures of bros and then went from there. Yeah,
I mean, Chris gave us a very specific douche bro list of things.
We had 4 different types of outfits for him. At one point, he was kind of dressed like a cowboy, I think.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He had a Stetson and cowboy boots.
Him and Cersei were much harder to nail down than
Cersei
Charlie and Vita.
Cersei was a nightmare.
You nailed Cersei, though. Wherever you ended up, it was the right place to end.
Well, we did that by kind of punting the decision down the road a bit, by saying, well, actually, the common bits are going to be the glasses and the lips, and everything else is going to change constantly.
The funny thing, though, is in issue 2, like, I don't know if this is because he punted or is because she actually is there. When Charlie and Vita go to the club, I swear to God, I was reading through it and I was like, is that Cersei in the background?
That might have been an accident.
Yeah, that will be pure accident.
No, I know. Well, when you were saying that, like, you punted it, and I saw because there's a woman with like similar lips and glasses. I was like, Cersei is so good. She was already there in the club before they got there, before she was even introduced. This is amazing. I do that character, I have to admit, is absolutely one of my favorites, just because. Well, it's such a good counterbalance to Trotter's just blowhard, big time, like assassin, like approach. She's just so subtle, and she's all about getting into the mindset of everybody else. And it seems like she really respects Vita, which is probably an atypical thing for her.
Yeah, I mean, Trotter's a murderer. Cersei is a hunter.
Right.
Trotter is so broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You can't help but feel a bit sorry for him by the end of issue 6.
Yeah. Actually, real last question. I did want to ask about the cars. So 10 minutes in the future, what did you look to for the cars? I got a weird Minority Report type vibe off of them.
For which ones? For the ones that drive themselves and
the ones that drive themselves, because the ones in Minority Report kind of drive themselves and are kind of a similar vibe to them, like kind of similar shape. And I love the contrast between those and Vita's car, because Vita's car is just an old beater basically, and it's kind of amazing.
Hers is a Chevy Bel Air, I think.
Okay.
I've specifically looked up a type of car for her to have. For the self-driving cars, I was just looking at lots of different types of cars and making them sort of softer shapes.
Sure.
Places, and it's like they don't need necessarily steering wheels. And I think at one point Chris said that the chairs can swivel round and stuff.
Oh, nice.
So that you can it's like a sitting room on wheels type thing.
Oh, that is my dream. I wish that existed. I don't really like driving. I love trains. Alaska's not big on trains because it turns out Alaska is very cold. In terms of the future stuff, was there anything that you like, any rules you kind of had as far as not things you didn't want to depict? I mean, like when you look at like slight future things, like when you look at something like Blade Runner or like basically anything in the future, everyone is eating Chinese food. Like, were there any kind of tropes for, slight futuristic stories that you wanted to avoid to a certain degree?
Most of them. Like...
I just didn't really want to make it like it had been departed too much.
Yeah.
Because
Sure.
like things don't change all that fast.
Exactly. And there's all that stuff of like, like you say with Blade Runner, like that dates it quite heavily because, there was all kind of written stuff in the era where they thought Japan was going to become the dominant cultural superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And that, I mean, Japan's, sure, it's up there, but it hasn't obliterated everything else in the way that a lot of people thought it would at that point.
Sure.
So stuff like that, if the more specific you try and get, the more you date something.
Right.
So we're content to, I think, to just like to round the world out with small gags like a pawn shop called Kickstarter and things like that.
My brain completely farted there, and I was like, "You can't giving your watch at Kickstarter, get flashback." No, not that kind of porn.
No, wrong kind.
I think Kickstarter was right next to Longer Than Life, wasn't it?
Yes,
Yeah.
It was.
It's so good. I'm gonna have to give it another read just so I can go through all the stores. But
look out for the food place.
What's that? Oh, the food place, of course.
Place.
Yeah. And no, like I said, I really appreciate the Good Place type references. I mean, what was I know that in Princeless and your other work, you had put in Easter eggs before. Was that something? Did you know you wanted to put Easter eggs in going into it, or was that partially because you love the storefronts in the Good Place so much?
Well, I think part of it is just sometimes it's like we can't think of anything that is proper, so put in a gag.
Yeah, because there's a lot of background to shape up at times, and Chris made it very clear that he was really happy with us just taking the lead on that. So then it became a case of, well, if we're going to have to do this repeatedly, what are we going to do that we won't get bored of? And
dumb gags,
stupid jokes.
Was
they always work for us?
The Krispy Kreme is different, isn't it? I'm trying to remember what the Krispy Kreme is.
Krispy Kremlin.
Krispy Kremlin, classic.
I thought, thought have a little dig at the political situation in America with that one.
Oh yes. Don't they also have like the hammer and sickle donut or whatever?
Yeah.
Oh, that's good. That's good.
Their tagline is "Eat like a czar."
That's amazing. Ro and Ted, that is all I have for you. Thank you so much for coming on and talk Crowded and everything else with me.
Well, thank you for having us. It's been a lot of fun.
It has. It's been a blast.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with the line art team on Crowded, Rose Stein and Ted Brandt. You can find them on Twitter at Rosie Tinted Specs and at Ted_Bandits, on their website brandtandstein.com, and in the Image Comics series Crowded. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support the show, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to exclusive written and audio content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the show on iTunes or Stitcher and give it a rating or review while you're at it. You You can find it on social media by liking it on Facebook at /sketched, that's SKTCHD, following it on Twitter at @sketchcomic, or following me at @slicefriedgold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Julio Anta, Greg Peterson, Gus, Andrew Scott, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Johan Brander, Paul Reinwand, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, JDC and Matt Gagnon, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, Kieran Mark Antonio, WMQ Comics, Akil, Greg Lockhart, Kokachi, Phil White, Ben Becker, Sean Pinello, Kent Heidelman, Philip Sevi, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Robert Wilson IV, Nick Paletto, Dylan Campbell, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Massey, Adam Boger, Xavier Files, Marie Schweitzer, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Baraldi, Evan Blazer, Brian McRae, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bruno Batista, Bobby Angus, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Phil Nall, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Maxwell Schmidt, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Lou Iovino, Nicholas Kesslake, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfill, Nicholas Gardner, Andrew Corrigan, Fiona Staples, Chris Morris, Chris O'Halloran, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert, Nick Lowe, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to the band Wolfpack, whose excellent track outro from their album Volmilch opens the show. Give them a listen as they're totally rad. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.